Okay, yes, to reiterate Vincent's point, good afternoon and welcome to the first meeting of the REFIT project. À nos collègues français, je suis ravi de voir autant de vous ici aujourd'hui. La France et Bibracte en particulier sont actuellement en tête de développeurs d'approches intégrées des passages culturels. Le projet de REFIT est très content de profiter de votre expérience et de vos aperçus. Pardonnez-moi, je ne parle pas très bien le français, donc j'espère que vous allez m'excuser si je continue en anglais. Merci beaucoup. It's probably easier for you. Okay, good. Okay, so I just wanted to begin today to explain a little bit about the rationale behind the REFIT project and outline some of its key aims. Now, as you all know, REFIT stands for Resituating Europe's First Towns. So by taking Iron Age oppida as its focus, its underlying aim is to examine how we might make cultural landscapes more sustainable. So the three partners from Durham University, Universidad de Complutense de Madrid and Bibracte, along with a number of stakeholder groups, our associated partners, aim to examine different practices across Europe. And from that we hope to draw out and explore how we might ensure landscape sustainability through the integration of stakeholders in their management. Now the project, as Vincent mentioned, has been funded by the Joint Heritage Initiative programme of the European Union, courtesy of the three national research agencies of the UK, France and Spain, and obviously we're very grateful to their support. There is one catch, of course, that the UK, by the end of the project in 2018, may no longer be part of this funding initiative. So let's all hope for the referendum in England in June. Before then I discuss REFIT's approach in more detail, I think it's worth reminding ourselves what we mean by cultural landscapes. It's a term we often use, but I think we need to remember what the term means, and asking why we see them as a challenge. So put very simply, cultural landscapes are those of which have been formed by the interaction of humans and the natural environment. And it's a term we widely use in the social sciences, yet it's a term which is poorly recognised generally by the general public and even many of the stakeholders in those kind of landscapes. It's often applied to outstanding landscapes, such as those here, designated as cultural landscapes by UNESCO, but this project very much follows the point made by the European Landscape Convention that Europe is full of cultural landscapes. And for these too, we need to understand the different pressures facing them, as well as the needs and the views of the different stakeholders within those landscapes. So the ecologists, the farmers, the heritage managers, the tourists, and so on. Why is this particularly pertinent now then? Well, there are a range of social and economic pressures which are facing these landscapes. And of course these vary from country to country, and indeed from different landscape to different landscape. But we might include, for example, illegal metal detecting, the profitability of farming, development, climate change, the needs of tourists, and so on. All of those place pressure on such landscapes to be sustainable for their inhabitants and to survive for future generations. And REFIT project believes that the best way of ensuring such sustainability is to help people recognise the value of those landscapes. So important then for this project is recognising that cultural landscapes are more than just their tangible archaeological remains, for example. They also exist in the intangible, the perceptions, the identities, the feelings, and sometimes indeed even the conflicts which exist and are inspired by those landscapes. And that forms an important key part of their distinctiveness and the character of those landscapes. So our project has therefore been significantly inspired by a cultural ecosystem services approach, crystallised, if you like, represented to some extent in the United Nations Millennium Ecosystems Assessment document. And this approach basically, and I'm simplifying here, basically emphasises the non-material benefits that people obtain from landscapes. So they might include spiritual enrichment, recreation, a general sense of well-being. And of course those aspects are built on, in many regards, the heritage and ecology of those landscapes. And of course can also not be divorced from the economic value of those landscapes. And such an approach really emphasises that all of these elements shouldn't be divorced from each other. We need to incorporate all of those elements together. And so that we need to firstly appreciate the values that groups and individuals have of these landscapes, and then secondly we need to empower the stakeholders within those landscapes to enable the integration of their values into management practices. And of course, one of the key things in doing this, and a major challenge for us, is overcoming the cultural divisions between those stakeholders. We often tend to use different technical languages. We sometimes appear, at least, to have different sets of values. Ensuring stakeholders are directly involved in the management of those landscapes and developing approaches to that management might identify common ground to break down the barriers between us, to break down those cultural divisions. So REFIT then aims to first understand and then attempt to integrate the perspectives of different stakeholders. So at one level, this is considering how our management strategies work, something that we want to explore more at this workshop, but it's also about developing engagement tools to enhance people's awareness of those cultural landscapes. So in particular for this project, we're interested in integrating the different values people have alongside our own archaeological knowledge about those landscapes. The aim all the while being to develop more holistic impressions of those cultural landscapes. So in order to do this, REFIT is trying to work directly with stakeholders in those landscapes. And our first step in doing that has been to invite representatives from stakeholder groups to directly contribute to, and we hope also benefit from, this research. So we're delighted therefore to have as our partners the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, the Parc Naturel de Morvan, Réseau de Grand Cycle de France, Cotswold Archaeology, and the regional government of Avila. And many more of you have also kindly agreed to act as advisors on the project, to pass on your expertise in other fields, digital heritage, cultural ecology, sociology, agriculture, and many more, for which we're very grateful. And by working across European borders, REFIT aims to try and transfer best practice, for example from here at Bibracte, to other landscapes and to other countries. And again, the key underlying goal of all of this, if you can see at the bottom here, is to develop strategies which will ensure the sustainability of those landscapes. So why then did we focus on Iron Age oppida to examine these issues? Well, I won't deny that partly you're at the mercy of 3 Iron Age specialists who started this project. But more seriously, we recognise that Iron Age oppida represent a microcosm of many of the wider issues impacting on cultural landscapes. But at the same time, they present their own particular challenges. Now, for those of you who don't really know much about Iron Age oppida, they date to the late 1st millennium BC, and they're a pan-European phenomenon stretching from Spain to Bohemia, from Britain to France. And whilst they vary in their form and their chronology, they represent a fundamental transformation in Europe, potentially, as the project's title suggests, the beginning of urbanism in Europe. And as such, they represent a key part of Europe's identity, of its fundamental identity of the past. As well as that, they present many similar issues for archaeologists working across Europe. So, for example, despite their importance in Europe's past, oppida are generally poorly recognised by the general public, and often by many of the stakeholders who live and work in those kind of landscapes. So a previous project funded by the European Union, of which Bibracte was a key leader, did an excellent job in developing new strategies to present oppida to the public, but one thing they didn't do was focus on examining the changing perspectives, or change the perspectives of the stakeholders in those landscapes. And it's this area that REFIT hopes to advance and build on the subsequent work that Bibracte has been doing in looking at those aspects. One of the key aspects of oppida is their vast scale. Bibracte, over there, is at least 200 hectares, probably, as Vincent might mention, potentially stretched to sort of beyond, so perhaps much larger. Badgenden, one of our other case studies I'll mention later, could be argued to cover many square kilometres. So oppida, by their very nature, are landscapes as much as they are archaeological sites. So they give us a window into that approach. But that scale, and the often relatively invisible nature of much of those archaeological remains, makes them hard to present to the public, it makes people hard to perceive them and understand them, and perhaps for people to engage with those landscapes in the same way. Such size also presents a significant challenge in managing those landscapes. Because of their nature, most oppida are also ecologically significant landscapes. They also tend to be working landscapes, as some of the images here show, at the same time, as well as being heritage sites. And as such, management of them has to be integrated with local landowners, local communities and local stakeholders to enable that management. Yet we know in many cases relatively little about how those stakeholders perceive and understand those landscapes in their own terms. whether they're aware of the archaeology, what that archaeology might mean to them, if anything. Oppida then, I think, presents an opportunity for us to explore the perceptions of stakeholders and to enhance their engagement in the management of those landscapes. So for REFIT then, we selected 4 oppida to act as case studies, and they were chosen to reflect the diversity of the phenomenon across Europe. There are also 4 sites which have also seen significant archaeological work, which has enhanced our understanding of the nature of those sites and those landscapes. So we know more about those kind of landscapes. And essentially those case studies are being used to explore how different stakeholders perceive and value these landscapes, how they're currently managed, both for heritage but also for other needs such as ecology, and how we might engage with stakeholders to enhance the awareness on the significance of those landscapes. So how are we actually attempting to do that in practice then? Well, the REFIT project runs until February 2018, and it's essentially split into 3 core elements. So to begin, we're assessing current awareness and perceptions of the case study landscape. So as well as using interviews and focus groups, we're also trying to develop novel ways of assessing the perceptions of these landscapes. So for example, looking at social media to look at the images, the pictures people take of these landscapes, where they take of them, through looking at GPS tracking to see how people move through those environments. And Gemma and Jonathan on our team will talk a little bit more about those approaches later. And as part of this, of course, too, we're also reviewing different management practices of those landscapes. The aim being to try and identify best practice in different places in Europe and whether any of those such approaches are transferable to other sites and other landscapes. The second stage then moves on to consider how we might better engage stakeholders in those landscapes. So we're focusing in particular on engagement tools and how they might integrate varied perspectives. So not just focusing on aspects such as archaeology. So to do this, for example, we have one of our consultants, Mike Allen, looking at ways of taking farmers on walks around the landscape to look at landscape development, landscape history, and to get them to understand the longevity of how those landscapes have changed. Bill Bevan, who's here, is exploring how we might create digital guides to these landscapes and integrate participation of stakeholders in those guides to these landscapes. And those engagement tools are being developed over this year, and the second workshop, which is in Madrid in October, will focus more on those engagement tools and how they're being created. And then the final stage of the project really explores the impediments to transferring knowledge between stakeholders. So I'll examine whether any of our engagement strategies worked, the approaches we've taken, what the problems were in trying to transfer ideas across countries and so on. And so we'll evaluate those approaches, and that will coincide with our final workshop, which will be in Cirencester in England in autumn of 2017. So as part of this workshop then, today's workshop then sort of focuses on considering different approaches to the management of these landscapes. So we'll be looking at a range of different approaches across different countries and from different perspectives. And I don't want to be prescriptive, but I think some of our key questions that I'm interested in anyway are thinking about how do we better understand stakeholder perceptions of these landscapes? How can we take into account different values of these landscapes? How are landscapes generally best managed for a sustainable future? And what are the best strategies for incorporating stakeholders to ensure that sustainability of landscape management? Now I think, as Vincent mentioned, we're very keen that varied perspectives should be heard on the REFIT project. That's what the REFIT project is all about. So please do contribute your perspectives. If you think we're doing things in a way that can be changed, then please say so. I think it's also worth saying that the project is still at its relatively early stages of development. So there is an opportunity to identify gaps in our approach, problems in our approach, perhaps even new avenues for research. So it would be really good to hear those. So please do contribute those. It leaves me finally just to say we're obviously extremely grateful to the Joint Heritage Initiative for supporting the project and to the respective national research agencies for allowing that kind of transfer of knowledge between European partners. Extremely grateful to Bibracte and all the team here for all the work they've done in organising things. And it leaves me just to say thank you so much for your participation. I do hope you find it fruitful and useful to yourselves. I look forward to meeting you all in person and hearing about your takes on the project over the next couple of days. So thank you. And I'll move on to the case studies. Thank you.